Hello, I'm Hal Ottaway with the Wichita Postcard Club, and it's time once again for a postcard of the week. And this week, I'm proud to introduce again our friend Ken Wilson from Dripping Springs, Texas. He's going to be our presenter this next club meeting. That'll be on January 11th, a Saturday afternoon, and we'll start at 1:45 Central Time that day, and we hope to have you here. Ken, please give us a kind of a preview of what
Okay.
you'll be speaking about, an
Okay.
example, maybe one
Uh,
or two.
Before we show the first slide, I'd just like to say that, thanks for asking me to do this. And you always ask for the postcard of the week, a postcard of the week. But as collectors do, if we have show and tell, we can't bring one. We have to bring two or three. So there's going to be two, but they're the same guy and the same story.
Good.
So one of the things I have collected for years is walkers. That's a sort of a generic term in the trade. These people are not always walking, but these are people who trekked across the United States by any sort of non-motorized means. They can be on foot, bicycle, dog sled, goat cart, or even horseback. And people would cross the United States. They did it for their own personal reasons. They did it to promote things. They did it to advertise, maybe to promote a state fair, or simply a means of livelihood. If they could walk, and so many of them sold postcards while they trekked, and that paid their way, made enough to eat and keep moving. It's an interesting topic. It's not like so many of postcard topics. There are sets and so forth, and these are each pretty unique. Sometimes there are multiples of a Walker postcard, but not usually. Sometimes the Walker postcards are one of a kind, and they all have a little bit different story. And on the 11th, we'll talk about a number of different types, but I chose one today. The first image is Edward Payson Weston. He was born in Rhode Island in 1839 to a very interesting, eclectic sort of family. His father was a traveler and a writer and a publisher. His mother had written and published a novel in the 1850s. And so he grew up with a real sense of adventure, and he left home when he was a teenager, and he worked on a steamship. He joined the circus. He traveled with musicians, and he was just, seeing the world, but he liked getting out and walking across the country. And he made a bet in 1859. He made a bet that Abraham Lincoln would not win the election for president. And he lost the bet, of course. And to pay off the bet, he had to walk from Massachusetts all the way to Washington, D.C. He did that. It took him 10 days in bad weather, rain and snow and sleeping out and so forth. He made it to the White House on the day of the inauguration, and he got there late, but he was able to meet the president. He shook Abraham Lincoln's hand, and he received such publicity for this walk that it set him out on his pretty much lifelong passion for walking and trekking.
Wow.
In the 1870s, a real sports craze that was happening in the 1870s and 80s was the sport of competitive walking, speed walking. And it sort of got its start in England, but it came to the United States. And Edward got into that, and he won a number of competitions. He would do these long, long races, sometimes indoors, sometimes outdoors, but he was winning competitions in speed walking. And for a while, he became the most well-known athlete in the world. And that seems very odd when you think about it, but you think, we didn't have the big football teams and basketball teams, and there were some boxers that were well known, but not a lot. And this was huge. These kind of events, even though it was speed walking, would draw huge crowds, and people knew who all. It was kind of like watching the Tour de France or something. It was a big deal. He continued to do this throughout his life, and he went on many walks across the United States for miles. Some of them were days long. He did a 6-day race that for PT Bar and won that. He continued on up into his 70s doing this. His some of his longest walks were after he reached, in his 60s and 70s. His last long trip was in 1913. He walked 1,500 miles from New York to Minneapolis in 51 days. The second postcard that is still him on one of those trips, and it's one of the treks that he took when he was 69. And he was very proud of all this, and he promoted himself. He made a little money from publicity and so forth. But they said, as he was going to come to a new town, if he's trekking cross country, he knew that people would turn out to see him. And he knew that the ladies would turn out to see him. So he spiffed up and made sure he had on his best hat and he was looking spiffy and so forth. And apparently he was a real ladies' man. But you can tell that in the images on those postcards. There are lots of postcards of Edward Payson Weston, but the story behind him, a lot of dealers have seen at least that first postcard, but some of them haven't seen too many of the others or didn't know the story behind it. Very, very interesting character. He spent the rest of his life doing these sort of walks until he got too old to do it. And then he spent the rest of his time promoting walking for fitness and health. And he warned everyone that the automobile was going to be the end of people's health, and it was going to promote laziness and people being sedentary and so forth. So that was his mission in life, and he apparently had a long, interesting life.
Sounds great, Ken. Thank you very much. I can hardly wait to see many of the other walkers and trekkers that you're going to show us. Wonderful
Each
postcards. It's a real slice of Americana for
each of
sure.
the Walker stories is very different, and we'll get to women and couples and children and all sorts of things, and they're all real interesting little stories.
Good deal. We'll see you this coming Saturday, January 11th at 1:45 p.m. Central Time. We'll see you there. Thank you so
Okay,
much, and thank you, Ken. Bye bye.
thanks, Hal. It's always
You
great.
bet.